Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It'll just be a few moments. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning. I'm Sunnyvale Mayor Larry Klein, and welcome to the 23rd installment of my weekly virtual office hours. People continue to reach out and say that they really appreciate these weekly live stream addresses and, hearing from their mayor. So I'll continue to do these while we shelter in place and even longer. This Facebook Live event is a great weekly chance for me to give you some updates, answer some questions, and of course, provide some words of encouragement for everyone. So, thank you for allowing me to continue to represent you during these difficult times and work for Sunnyvale for everyone's interest. I hope everyone is doing well, staying healthy. Uh, Please take care of yourself, both physically and mentally. This has been a big week for many. And it's really been difficult with the distance learning. So it's back to school week. So welcome to all the teachers or parents and students who are are dealing with and persevering through these difficult times. Distance learning is not simple, and I've talked to several teachers that are slowly getting back into the groove. But that face to face, that direct contact of seeing people's expressions and being able to make that connection uh, is not there as much through Zoom or whatever your remote tools are that you're using. But uh, from that standpoint, from that standpoint, it's important for me to to hear people's issues. And I know it's not easy, but going back to school, getting that education, even if it is remote, is an important step. And hopefully we'll get through this. And hopefully, by late fall, by January, things will have opened up and we will be back in the classrooms. But we'll see how things progress in the fall. So keep following the county health orders. Remember, you can do your part to stop the spread of the virus. Continue to wash your hands, don't touch your face. You know, reduce the number of people that you come in contact with on a daily basis. Maintain safe social distance when you're out. And of course, wear your face mask. It helps, it's mandatory, and you might actually be fined for it, depending upon what's happening and what you're actually doing out. So, as I've said before, if you need a face covering, please contact me. I got another group of them this week, and thanks to those that continue to provide, face masks for free for people. We're not out of the woods yet, and people that you meet or you could be a carrier and not show symptoms. So that's, being asymptomatic, you need to be very careful with who you're coming in contact with, whether or not that's friends or family or anyone out in the community. So please be safe, please be careful. So right now we have reached 157 days after the March 16th public health order that started the shelter in place in attempt to stop the spread of COVID-19. So since that declaration, a lot has happened. A lot happens every day, every week. And so I have daily press conferences and seminars to watch. I have conference calls to confer and advocate on your behalf. It's not an easy time for anyone, but I hope that I'm representing you well, and I hope that from that standpoint, people are doing well through difficult times. This is a new normal, and how you manage through that is difficult. New problems, new issues seem to occur every week, and I understand how much fatigue people have, and I hope that I can help out however I can. So let's go ahead and get to what's happened at the federal, state, county level, and city level over the last week. So it's been another crazy week, stressful week for many. And last Tuesday, the Santa Clara Board of Supervisors met, and I just want to recap an important change that they did several things. One, they adopted an emergency ordinance that basically put a possible fine on not wearing your mask. And this was targeted for certain community and especially businesses that weren't following the county health orders. And this is done at a state level, that people should be wearing their masks unless they can safe social distancing when they're out. If they're inside any building, they need to be wearing their mask. And there's certain exemptions depending upon age, depending upon medical condition. But in general, people should be wearing the mask, and the majority of people that I see on a daily basis are wearing their mask. But this basically put, similar to what it was happening in other counties, put a fine. Violators could be fined from $25 to $500, and businesses could be fined from $250 to $5,000. And so that fine would depend upon the severity of the violation, the gravity to public health, and then of course, is it a repeat offense? There are multiple considerations depending upon what's happening. I haven't heard of anyone getting a fine yet in Sunnyvale, and that's being worked out between our public safety department and the county as far as how that process would go. But it's at the discretion of the enforcement officer, and as opposed to other counties, the county said that there would be a compliance, basically education. And what was important is it was a process that you had a chance to correct it. So you had up to 72 hours to correct it, and it especially applies to people or to businesses. But people, if they were fined, they would have a chance to explain their process and conceivably not have to pay the fine. So I haven't heard anything kind of an update from a county standpoint of whether or not people are being fined. I know that it was finally being used as kind of a stick as opposed to the carrot or just the you should be doing this to certain businesses, not in Sunnyvale, but outside of Sunnyvale, a few cities that have had some businesses that haven't been following the rule of the law. And then the Board of Supervisors also extended the moratorium, the eviction moratorium, until September 30th. So that was important because that was set to expire on the 14th. And so that's now extended to the end of September. And conceivably it'll be extended again. But right now we'll see what happens. In the way the county eviction moratorium worked, it was for both businesses and residential, that those residents, if they were affected by COVID-19, and there was a little bit of proof that they had to be to show that they had been directly impacted by COVID-19, and that's a lot of people in our county, in our country, in our state, in our country, but people would have 6 months after whatever the end date of that eviction moratorium is to pay back 50% of what they owed during the shelter in place, and then they would have to pay back the other 50% 6 months after that. So they had basically 1 year to pay back the eviction moratorium, the shelter in place back rent, and there had to be no fines, there couldn't be any late fees, so that was good from that standpoint. And there's also two bills going through the state legislature, AB 1436 and Senate Bill 1410, which are trying to basically do additional eviction protections, and so trying to deal with landlords and evictions and payback. So not really sure where those bills are right now. I haven't checked in the last day or two, but those are going through to see if there's additional protections and that can be put in place. And then the county also had several healthcare providers give updates, and you'll probably be hearing more about that next week. Definitely there have been some issues about healthcare providers not providing COVID-19 testing, and so the county put forth basically health orders about a month and a half ago to try to make sure that people that needed to be tested and were covered were able to be tested. That being said, several large healthcare providers in the county have not made it easy for people to get tested. So definitely, that has been an ongoing issue. Some have been very good, and El Camino Hospital has done free testing for people in the district, and they're basically doing a pop-up later this month for service workers, healthcare workers that need to be tested. So that's been very good, but there's been a few that haven't been following that, and trying to move that health and hospital system in the county in a positive direction for months has been an effort. I've been working with county supervisor president Cindy Chavez and other supervisors on this. Definitely, this isn't an easy sort of thing, and as we go into to the election period for healthcare providers, this will be definitely something that we will be bringing up from businesses, from the cities themselves. So making sure that our workers can get tested if they request it at a healthcare provider is critical, especially during COVID-19 and other things. And last Friday was a hot one, and we've had a very hot week, very high temperatures for the last week, and that excessive heat, which we didn't know when we met last Friday, led to excessive issues and strain on the California power grid. So people, PG&E began having basically rotating power outages starting Friday afternoon, and this was without notice. It was affected 200 to 250,000 customers, and for once, this wasn't the public safety power shutoff that we had last year. So this wasn't, PG&E raising issues that there's wind issues, or that they want to make sure that the wind doesn't cause power lines to hit trees and trees to catch on fire. So this isn't that. This was the CAISO, which is the California Independent System Operators. So this is basically the statewide grid operator that said that, and they oversee the power grid and make sure that the balance of energy demand and supply works out. And they basically told PG&E and actually all the state operators that they needed to start these rolling blackouts. So this wasn't the same as last year. This was somebody telling PG&E that what they needed to do, and they needed to start this. And those rotating blackouts started, about 3 p.m. and went to 11 p.m. And for multiple days up until Wednesday, that was a possibility. So that people were requested to reduce their energy usage, and that's always a good thing, during the daytime. But definitely as people were coming home, turning on their air conditioners or staying at home with air conditioners late in the afternoon, that became a very big strain on the power grid, and figuring out how to deal with that definitely is an issue. Continue to conserve power as much as possible, but this is, PG&E was unable to notify customers in advance for those power shutoffs, and it was more of a rolling thing as opposed to the emergency, issues that the PPSP, those power shutoffs that we were seeing over the last year were done with a little bit of notice, and so they could say, oh, we're going to see high winds, and so we're going to be shutting things off. These shutoffs were kind of a rolling blackout sort of thing, but the bigger issue was when the power was tried to be turned back on, there were, transformer explosions and other issues within the network that PG&E spent, a lot of time this week trying to correct those problems. And so if you were without power this week, my heart goes out to you. I heard from a lot of residents that lost power for 12 hours, 18 hours, for several days even. And so, I know that it affected different people around the city in different ways. There were people that on one side of the street, they had power. On the other side of the street, they didn't have power, and that's all depends on how the grid is laid out. And so, it's not been an easy week as far as that's concerned, especially as power is concerned. And then on Saturday, we had lightning and thunder, and normally I wouldn't be talking about the weather other than, the heat caused certain issues, but it was pretty amazing. I've lived here for 30 years and hadn't seen that much lightning and thunder. I grew up in Ohio, and it reminded me of summers back in Ohio. Normally, although those lightning and thunder would build to a big downpour, and then it would be pretty much over. Well, we had a little bit of rain, but it wasn't, it wasn't as much as I would have expected, and it helped kind of cool things off just a little bit. But the bigger issue, the National Weather Service then issued a red flag warning because of the increased risk of wildfires, and definitely we saw lots of effects of fires over the last few days. I saw a photo of one of the palm trees in downtown San Jose that was on fire. It was a line of palm trees that had been hit by lightning and was basically on fire. And so the lightning strikes caused, lots of wildfires throughout the state, in the north and the south. And so now we're dealing with those effects. And so on Monday, Governor Newsom had his usually Monday lunchtime update. And so he talked about the transition for our power grid for quality, low cost, and reliability. And that's been a big thing. Moving to greener energy has been good. However, it needs to be reliable. And so a lot of focus is being made on, trying to make sure how we can be more reliable going forward. And is that, making sure that there's appropriate backup to the power grid so that in the evening hours we can have enough power saved up that we can add additional power into the grid if necessary. It's that management of that grid. And so, investigations will be done, trying to deal with figuring out what happened, making sure that how we get the appropriate notices out, making sure that we have enough power. And there are certain measures that were already taking place from around the state that the governor laid out to make sure that we have enough power to meet our requirements. And then the big call to set your AC to 78 between 3 and 10 p.m. Use major appliances during off hours. Turning off all necessary lights when you don't need them. So that was part of the governor's new call to action as far as dealing with that. From a COVID-19 update, 44 counties were on the list. Santa Cruz County was removed, and from a standard standpoint, the Cal Ready system now seems to be operating close to normal. From a county standpoint, we still seem to be a little bit behind on how we get the response to test cases, but the backlog has been cleared up. And and then he definitely the governor spent a lot of time on flex alerts, on the question of investigating how we ended up with the issues with power and the grid issues that CASA raised. Earlier this year, I did a lot of advocacy on changing the structure for PG&E, on how they came out of bankruptcy. And I was a little not really happy with the judge finally basically allowing PG to continue normally. PG&E continued from bankruptcy. It revived itself, it renewed itself, post bankruptcy with very little change. And so I do think, as opposed to investor driven and profit driven, being more of a JPA, being more of a regional government support power grid would have been a lot more positive, but that didn't happen, and whether or not that would have fixed any of the issues that we've seen this week, I'm not really sure, but definitely having more control and making sure that any excess money is being put back into the system to deal with improving the system, improving the power grid would have been positive in my mind. And then on Tuesday, Governor Newsom declared a statewide emergency, and there were lots of fires that continued to blaze, and this was all a result of the lightning strikes over the weekend, and this is around the state right now. Declaring a state of emergency is really important because, for one thing, it defines that we get mutual aid and federal support. So the National Guard has basically been called to duty to help out with fire safety and fighting the fires. We get assistance from other western states, so Nevada, Oregon have already sent people to help out with the fires. And there's more than 300 fires statewide. So that is very difficult, and there's a lot in the Bay Area by themselves, but around the state, and so many of those fires continue to burn, and we're seeing the ongoing effects of those, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later. But the health effects of bad air quality have not been easy in the last few days, and we continue to see that depending upon which way the wind blows, how bad that can be. On Wednesday, Newsom had another packed press conference, and so this was very full of information. The West Coast continue to have a heat wave. We had red flag warnings, more than 10,000 lightning strikes over the last weekend and days after. And we reached a record temperature in Death Valley, which might be the highest ever recorded, of 130 degrees Fahrenheit. So we think that might be the hottest ever recorded in human history. So definitely, it's been a hot one, around the state with this dome, this heat wave dome that's kind of set up over California, and hopefully that will move on soon. But because of the heat, Governor Newsom continued to talk about reducing our power. Continue to do what you can, whether or not it's reducing your AC, turning off lights, appliance usage, whatever you can do to help the grid. We'll continue to do investigations about, those rolling outages. Luckily, we didn't have to have any outages in the last few days. And so the grid is in at least a stable place right now, but hopefully that's all dependent upon how hot it gets and how much conservation people do at the end of the day. So Governor Newsom also announced on Wednesday that the state will be issuing new guidelines for reopening businesses over. So next week they'll be doing this, but he didn't give a lot of details. So there's been a lot of negotiations between the states, the counties, trying to figure out what the new criteria will be. And it'll be a more prescriptive criteria. It'll be a little more dynamic depending upon the county, the health order statewide, and how people, right now, a lot of it's based upon that 14-day rolling average. So it might be dependent upon different businesses. 7 days for some, 14 days for others, 21 days for others. But we'll hear more about that next week. And now, as opposed to 44 at the beginning of the week, there are 40 counties on the watch list. So San Diego and Salinas dropped off. A few others dropped off. I think San Francisco might be dropping off in the next day or so. And then Governor Newsom also talked about working with the federal government on federal unemployment benefits. And we talked about this a week and a half ago, about President Trump's executive order saying that they would give $300, they would give $400 to federal unemployment on a weekly basis for residents in the state, 300 of which would be paid by the federal government, and 100 would have to be paid by the state. So Governor Newsom and his staff have been working directly with the federal government to try to make sure that happens for those people in need. That being said, that negotiation hasn't finished yet, and so we'll see how that goes. It's finding that other $100, and whether or not the federal government would pay out the $300 if the other 100 isn't there. Lots of questions about that, and as I talked about last week, lots of questions about all the executive orders that were laid out. On Wednesday, and we'll just talk kind of a bigger picture, the fires continued. My heart goes out to friends, family, everyone who's been affected by the fires. I know personally, multiple people that have had to evacuate their homes in Santa Cruz County, here in Santa Clara County, or, on the unincorporated areas. The air quality has been very poor because of these fires. And this is some of the worst fires we've seen in years. I've watched several press conferences with county fire chiefs, Cal Fire. It's not an easy time, and getting control of these fires has not been easy. And staffing, from a state standpoint, Governor Newsom keeps looking at hiring temporary firefighters from around the state. The air pollution, though, has been really bad in several days. It's been good that people have had their masks, but you can the quality in air index goes up to 500 max, but it's been, in the high one, between 150 and 200, depending upon where you are. And that's high enough to cause coughing, difficulty breathing, headaches, depending upon, what your health conditions are. Stay inside if you can. Please take care of and check on family members, friends who might be at risk. The air shifted a little bit Wednesday or Thursday, so we have a little bit of blue skies right now, but we have fires in the Santa Cruz Mountains. We have fires, to the east of us. We are in kind of a bowl here in Santa Clara County, in Silicon Valley. So conceivably the wind shifts and we could have lots of smoke again. We've seen this for days right now. People, take care of yourselves, please. This is very difficult times. At least it's cooled off a little bit. That being said, it's cooled off, but opening up your windows is no longer, a positive thing with all the ash and smoke in the air. Seeing ash on the cars when you're waking up in the morning shows how much particulate, and how much particulate you can't see is part of this. So definitely be careful, be safe. And then from a Sunnyvale standpoint, we actually sent out one of our fire engines, Engine 41, to be deployed in Salinas to help with the river fire. So mutual aid is what we do. So we evaluate what our needs are from a city standpoint, and then figure out what trucks, and figuring out from the corresponding communities around us what trucks, what personnel we can send to help out from a state level. So I'm hoping our firefighters, our public safety, they're out there helping to fight those fires, stay safe. And then let's see, and then other things that you can do. So I just want to remind people, we started seeing evacuations from a county standpoint. So in this, there are people in Santa Cruz County, as well as the unincorporated areas in the east side of Santa Clara County have been requested to evacuate. And a lot of this depended upon what neighborhood you were lived in, and whether or not it was part of San Jose or unincorporated Santa Clara, and how far you are up in the hills. But getting that notification out, telling people that they need to evacuate, is critical. Making sure that you have appropriate notification. So one thing that you can do is sign up at sccalert.org. Again, that's sccalert.org. And so this will basically, you enter your phone number and the phone number of other people in your household, and it's free. It gives you, updates on fire, on earthquakes, on severe weather, on crime incidents that have happened in your area. So you enter your address and your telephone numbers, your cell phone numbers, and that will give you alerts. And so that's important when we need fire evacuation. The other place that you should be signing up is Nixle, Nixle.com. And that's even easier. You can just text your zip code to 888-777, and that will give you similar updates on severe weather, on criminal activities, severe traffic, missing persons. So both of those systems are positive, and there's overlap, but they don't match perfectly. But if I would sign up for both of them if you can. So Nixle.com, Nixle.com, and sccalert.gov. So that's or sccalert.org. Sorry, is important, and that's those evacuations. And I'm hoping, and I confirmed with Mayor Liccardo in San Jose that they have their fire department working very hard to make sure that those fires are kept in check in their county. They don't think that they're going to have to do evacuations, but things could change rapidly. And, for Santa Clara residents, evacuating everything east in basically east Santa Clara County. For Santa Cruz County, it was evacuating everything west of Highway 17. That's a lot of people that are being evacuated. And so if you've been told to evacuate, and I don't think there'll be probably anyone watching this that'll be evacuating, but from an evacuation standpoint, there's basically places set up, evacuation resource centers set up, several places in our county, one of which is the Milpitas Library, so at 160 North Main Street in Milpitas, that are set up for anyone that had to be evacuated. And then also in, and then Ann Sobranto High School in Morgan Hill. So you have basically Morgan Hill and Milpitas to kind of deal with South County and East County. And that's and for Western Santa Cruz, there's also several locations that are being set up in Santa Cruz. But if you need assistance, if you've been evacuated, the American Red Cross is the place to go. And this number is 866-272-2237. They will give you more information. And if you're evacuating and just have questions from a county standpoint, the number is 408-808-7778. And so if you've had any issues, if you have been evacuated, that's where you can call to get help. From a city standpoint, we've actually had to reduce services. So because of the bad air and continued particulates, we released information yesterday about library service changes because of the forecast of continued unhealthy air quality. The public library, Sunnyvale Public Library, will not be offering its sidewalk service. So starting yesterday up until next Thursday, they will be actually through Saturday, and of course it's only on Tuesday, so things will restart on Tuesday for the sidewalk service. So if you have holds to be picked up, those won't be discarded. Those will be held at least until Tuesday. Your holds will be waiting for you. If you need a library card, you can actually do that online. If you need to return items, you can do that. But for your safety, just keep them at home, as much as possible. Safeguard your health. You can definitely renew them if you can, but your items, when you return them, and actually this was a question that I had previously, what happens when our items, because of COVID-19, what happens when someone turns in a book? They're normally quarantined anyway for at least 4 days, but they're checked in automatically and then quarantined for 4 days. So, but all that has been postponed, from that standpoint. There's also supposed to be a book sale this weekend on the 22nd. That's been postponed, until the following Saturday, so August 29th. So we're trying to get back. A lot of books have been donated. A lot of people cleaned out their closets and their bookshelves. So, Friends of the Library is going to have their next book sale on Saturday, August 29th. So that it moved from tomorrow to a week from tomorrow. And then I wanted to update some upcoming city events. So we talked last week about the community listening event, and the next event is this coming Monday, August 24th, and this will be an LGBTQ+ dialogue and panel discussion. And our first general listening event, and this was all in response to the murder of George Floyd and, racial injustice. Our first general listening event happened way back in June 25th. The second session happened on July 22nd, and that one was being more focused on the youth. And then this coming Monday will be on LGBTQ issues, and that's on Monday from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. And this event is done in partnership with the Santa Clara County Office of LGBTQ Affairs, Silicon Valley Pride. It is Silicon Valley Pride Month, fabulous Sunnyvale, and of course the city of Sunnyvale. If you want more information there, you can go to sunnyvale.ca.gov/unity and sign up for upcoming events, to register for that event if you want to speak. And so that's an opportunity for this coming Monday. One of the things that's happening on Tuesday at Tuesday's council meeting is we're looking at the final draft plan of the active transportation plan. And so this gives basically the overall picture for vision for at least the next 10 years. And there will be chances for that to change, but it's an overall vision for bicycling, for pedestrian access, to make things safer throughout our city, safe routes to schools, Vision Zero. It captures a lot of important issues to first make sure that people are safe, and second, to give them more opportunities to be, use active transportation, whether or not that's scooters or bikes or just walking within our city. So that final draft plan, which has went through several commissions over the last month, will come to us on Tuesday's meeting at 7 p.m. So take a look. You can go to the city website and get an update on that council meeting, as well as get more information on the active transportation itself. We also need your feedback on air quality. We're updating Sunnyvale's general plan. We need your feedback on air quality, environmental justice, noise conditions. So that general different elements of the general plan are updated, every few years. And so this is your opportunity to watch a video that's online and then take a survey that's online. So I did a post about that earlier this week. You can go online and search for that, or take a look at the city website. So that's Monday is the Unity session. On Tuesday there's a council meeting. On Wednesday there's outreach for the Lakewood Branch Library. So the city of Sunnyvale has been partnering, and we approved this beginning of this year, to create a Lakewood Branch Library, and I'm really happy that that's finally occurring. But that's in partnership with the Fremont Union High School District, as well as the Sunnyvale School District, to provide basically a library in a community in an area that's really needed additional services for some time. And so on Wednesday, there'll be a virtual open house to gather community input. And so it's around the site parameters and the organization, the interior layout, and looking at kind of the massing and the architecture of that project. So from that standpoint, it'll be a good first glance at some of the concept views that the contractor, the consultant the architect has been putting forth. And so that will be Wednesday, August 26th. And that's a drop-in event, so you don't need to be there for the entire time, but it'll be between 5 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. So that's, so you have a chance to give feedback on what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like to see as far as that design. We had another one of those events about a month and a half ago, and this is now capturing some of that feedback, limiting, the design, and kind of giving some general layout. So hopefully, make your voice heard, take part in this. It's really important that the city gets feedback. And while we always keep asking for feedback, sometimes COVID-19 and going to more of a virtual world has helped some people be more active. Of course, it's created barriers for others, and so it's difficult to make sure that there's that balance. I'd like to see more outreach in the community, and hopefully, take 20 minutes, take a half hour out of your day, give these feedback, because the city is always looking for this feedback at the end of the day. So let's go ahead and move to the county health dashboard on testing, on hospital cases, on state monitoring. So our cases have decreased a little bit over the last week. So we're now up to 15 1,258 cases. That's up about 1,900 from last week. That's down a little bit from the week before. So, but it's stabilized a little bit, but it's still quite a few number of cases that we're seeing on a daily basis. We've had 217 deaths now. That's 12 from the last week, or no, that's not right. That's 9 from the last week. So we're down a little bit, but you know, it still continues to affect people in the county, and you know, I can't think of, and I know of several people that are going through right now that they know they have loved ones, parents that are not doing well and are in ICU and not doing well with COVID-19. So I hope that they get better, and you know, my prayers go out to them. From a hospitalization standpoint, we currently have 162 hospitalizations, which is down a little bit from last week. For COVID-19 numbers in general, you know, San Jose broke the 10,000 case number earlier this week, so they have 10,112. That's up about 1,200 from last week, which is quite a few. So San Jose has had about 2/3 of the number of cases that have occurred in the county, and then Sunnyvale has had 688 cases. That's up about 80 from last week, which is down a little bit from the week before, which is 89. So we're slowly ticking down as far as the number of cases. So it's not easy. You know, definitely do what you can do to help prevent the spread of COVID. You know, wear your mask. Do what do what's safe. Do what's the law at the end of the day. Make sure you don't get fined. Make sure that you're being safe when you're around other people. Okay, I continue to do a lot of advocating on your behalf. And you know, at the county level, you know, we continue to have discussions about testing, about tracing. The mobile county pop-up van will return to Sunnyvale, and it came 2 Mondays ago to Murphy Park, so right along Sunnyvale Avenue and California. And so for the next few months, we'll be seeing it on the 2nd and 4th Monday. And this is only by appointment. So the link will be going up later this afternoon. You can always go to sccfreetest.org to sign up. But we were the first time that, since the county's been doing appointments, we were the first time 2 weeks ago that we filled up all the spots before the actual appointment date. So Sunday afternoon, the Sunday before the testing, we filled up all the available spots. We did have a few spots, a few no-shows, but a lot of the people showed up, and there were a few people that showed up and asked if they could be tested, and depending upon the time of the day, they were actually able to be tested if they just dropped in. But this is mainly to make sure that people aren't waiting hours on end. And I was very happy to see that, you know, it worked very well. Our CERT team was out there to help people. And, you know, from that standpoint, the county office did a great job. We went through about 640 tests on that day. So, you know, we'll continue to do this going forward. You know, the county has been going around different cities in North County, in South County, and Central, making sure that this pop-up testing is available for anyone who needs it. And then at a federal level, I've continued to advocate for you know, the next stimulus bill. We'll see where that goes. You know, the negotiations continue between the Senate and the House, but we still haven't made a lot of progress as far as those bills are concerned. We sent letters, you know, had phone calls. You know, I worked at, you know, the mayor's conference trying to get, you know, progress made, but you know, it basically takes them to sit down to figure out how much stimulus will be going to the cities, to the people. Unemployment, it's critical. Okay, let's go ahead and get to questions. First up, what should I do to be prepared for evacuations? So, you know, for any emergency, you need to be informed first and foremost. So again, go to nixol.com. or text your zip code to 888-777, or go to sccalert.org and sign up with your address and your cell phone number so that you can be notified. That's the first and foremost thing that you can be doing. Other things, you get an emergency go bag together. And so let me list some of the things that should be going in that go bag. And I posted about that yesterday or the day before. It should have face masks, especially now under COVID-19, and 2 face masks, two per person in your household is critical. And that's a good habit anyway that people should be having is, having face masks when they come home, wash their face mask, dry one, but in your to-go bag, you should have at least 2. So if you need face masks, definitely feel free to reach out. You should have sanitation supplies, disinfectant wipes. This is the world of COVID. A year ago I wouldn't have said this, but now it's really important. A map marked with your evacuation routes, all the medication supplies that you might need, extra set of keys, eyeglasses, contact lenses, a change of clothes, cash and small bills, a first aid kit, flashlight, charging cables for your cell phone. That we have to stay connected, whether or not it's a charging cable, or basically some sort of power pack, portable radio, batteries, baby and pet supplies. Don't forget about your little ones in your life. Your ID, important documents, water, and water is always a critical thing. I went through CERT many years ago, and water is always critical after any, not just evacuation, but any emergency. Having 1 gallon of water per person per day ready to go is not easy. Water is very heavy, but being prepared as much as possible, whether or not that's bottled water or bottles and jugs, or big containers, which if you go through the CERT program, they'll basically show you how to do, how to save your water in the best way. Having a certain amount of food, non-perishable, easy to use items, and of course, any valuables that you might have, personal computers, hard drives, just to make sure that, any family mementos in case, fire actually hit your home or whatever the emergency might be. So please be prepared. That's the important thing about going through the CERT program that becomes really a critical sort of thing at the end of the day. Vanessa asked, is there any update on the Fair Oaks Magical Bridge Playground construction? We're excited to see an inclusive playground in Sunnyvale. I'm overjoyed too. It's like this has been a lot of work over the last 2 years. We did a lot of funding for, this was brought up by a Girl Scout who came to City Council several years ago and said, this happened in Palo Alto, why can't we have this here? And, the city reached out, we figured out, the Magical Bridge, which is a great, basically it's an all-access playground that opened up in Palo Alto. We've helped fund it from a city standpoint. The county threw in some funds, and they did a certain amount of donations matching. And so ultimately that will be at Fair Oaks Park. And we're currently going through that Fair Oaks renovation. And the Magical Bridge project, Magical Bridge Playground project will be part of that. Construction, we're currently doing the final bidding. And so staff expects that bidding to finalize in September, and then construction would start sometime in the fall and last from 12 to 14 months. So that's for all of Fair Oaks Park. So Fair Oaks in general, and there's a long-term plan to basically renovate each of the big parks in our city, and slowly working our way through. And so Fair Oaks is the next park that will be renovated. And so hopefully, we'll start seeing that late fall, beginning of next year, and maybe by the end of 2021, maybe beginning of 2022, that Magic Bridge, as well as a brand new park, will be open up. New buildings, new, dog park. There'll be, a whole different layout as far as that's concerned. Sonal asks, Can the city ask developers to add a child-friendly play structure at the Redwood Plaza? I don't see it in their videos. So that's been a question. Definitely, there's been updates as far as Redwood Square is concerned. That's been, they don't have a final design for Redwood Square. There's been, and they'll be doing additional outreach. So we'll see. There's definitely time for feedback as far as the final layout of Redwood Square is concerned. So they did a general plan and kind of the development agreement, but the final design for Redwood Square and each of the different blocks that need to be developed still needs to be, brought up to date and see the final layout. So there is still time as far as that's concerned. One of the big things was whether or not one of the trees would be removed, and that was approved. No, I wasn't completely happy with that, but one of the trees would be removed. That would basically open up a little bit more of that park. There'd be several other redwoods planted in that park. And as far as playgrounds are concerned, part of the Plaza del Sol redesign, so phase 2 of Plaza del Sol across from the Caltrain station, was to add a playground as part of that project. So we will be seeing a playground downtown for kids. Chris asked, what can we do, Sunnyvale? What can we be doing to help our neighbors in Santa Clara County, Santa Cruz County, etc., where homes or lives have been turned upside down by these fires? Definitely contact the Red Cross, give blood, give donations. The Red Cross has basically been operating these evacuation centers, and that's one of their standard duties that the counties, the state relies upon Red Cross to do. So definitely, figure out what can be done. They will take a certain amount of donated goods, but they have a lot of this basically emergency evacuation procedure in place as far as beds, as far as clothes, donated clothes, as far as food and water. But contact them, donate to them. The Red Cross is a great organization. Always give blood. Even during COVID-19, there's still been a shortage of blood. Definitely do what you can do. Good morning. Have any Sunnyvale DPS units been deployed to support the fires? Yes, at least one fire truck and crew have been sent to Salinas, and we're evaluating right now whether or not to give another truck to mutual aid. But definitely we have some of our public safety officers on the front lines right now, and make sure your prayers go out to them. Want to give a big shout out to the family-owned local restaurants in Sunnyvale. So definitely, if you have any questions about the restaurant, in my mayor's restaurant project has been going on for a while now. I'm just reached 140 restaurants since shelter in place, and so I take a day off every few days just to not either because of time or not wanting to go out on a specific day, taking a little break from that. But pretty much I hit 5 or 6 restaurants a week, and we're up to 140 now. And on that note, some longtime favorites, Longhorn Restaurant opened a few weeks ago. Country Gourmet, which had thought that they might not reopened on Tuesday for takeout. So it's actually good to see some of these long-term, Sunnyvale institutions actually coming back online. And then there's new restaurants opening all the time. So definitely, I'm happy to see, that we haven't, I've seen reports that conceivably 40% or more of restaurants will be closing because of COVID-19. At least for our city, a majority of them have opened up. So I'm very happy about that. We have seen a few like specialties, the old Il Postale, which closed, but like Il Postale, there's the Sweet Sicily took its place. So we are seeing, new restaurants open, and there will be more opening in the next few weeks. Do we need to wear a mask if we're just walking around the neighborhood? We are observing social distancing. So this is part of the state order that you do not need to be wearing a mask. And I've had many people ask me about this. You do not need to be wearing a mask when you're walking around your neighborhood. You need to have a mask with you at all times. You need to be ready to wear that mask if you can't safe socially distance. That's the critical thing, and I don't know how much walking you want to be doing with the smoke in the air and all that. That being said, you're not going to be fined. You're not going to be, you don't need to wear a mask. It's good measure if you wear your mask if you can. But, when I go on a run in the mornings, I have my mask in my pocket. I'm running with my dog. I don't want that face covering, especially, I've tried it and it's completely soaked by the time I get back and hard to breathe because it's so wet and everything. That being said, always have a mask with you when you're out, but you do not need to be wearing a mask at all times as long as you can safe socially distance. And if I'm seeing somebody on the same side of the sidewalk, when you see someone, immediately put your mask on, cross over to the other side of the street, whatever you need to do to maintain that safe social distance as much as possible. Let's see. I'm new to the U.S. and worried about the wildfires. Can they come into Sunnyvale? Well, they could come into Sunnyvale. That being said, the risk is relatively low. Sunnyvale there's several emergencies that Sunnyvale could always have. One of which is earthquakes, which is a California-wide problem. And, I moved here about 2 months before the 1989 earthquake. The other big issue, of course, is floods. And so part of Sunnyvale is built, relatively close to the water. And so conceivably, on a 100-year flood, portions of the city could actually, and depending upon the storms and everything, portions of the city could flood. That being said, fires are limited. It is a possibility. It's relatively low, but it is always a possibility. As you go farther and farther away from the hills and large amounts of wood and stuff and items, a lot of the issues that they're having right now, evacuating Pescadero, is because there's so many trees in those areas, and it's basically surrounded by trees. We have trees, but it's a little bit harder in the areas that we're living in. So, not an impossibility, but definitely, always a concern, and more a concern, I think, are the effects of fires in the surrounding communities, smoke, and things of that nature. Let's see. I already had that question. Oh, yeah. And so someone basically said they had a relative in the hospital this week, and even with their giant filters, couldn't keep the smell out. Filters will help with particulate matter. Yes, so definitely, even hospitals don't have enough systems to filter out the smoke. And so, yeah, that's an ongoing issue with all the fires. Definitely, this affects a lot of people. And from that standpoint, it's difficult from the air quality, because most people cool their house with opening up their windows. Some people have air conditioning, and then whether or not they have appropriate filters on that air conditioning, I'd say a very small percentage of the city have air conditioning. We don't in our home, so we have lots of fans going. I have my fan here right on my desk, but it's that air quality and letting that pour air into your house. And we're lucky that we normally have breezes in the afternoon off of the bay, but when there's poor air quality everywhere, it doesn't help anyone. So definitely filters help. But even I knew someone at a hospital this week that the fire alarms went off because not because there was a fire, but because the air quality was so poor that the fire alarm detected that there was a fire, and so they had to deal with those systems and dealing with all that. Okay, and I think that's done. It's way past 10 o'clock, so if you can. I did get the same question I got last week, but I want to bring it up one more time. What's happening at the old Macy's parking lot? Definitely people have been asking this. It's trenched, it's fenced right now. What they're doing is doing remediation for the ground underneath, because ultimately there used to be dry cleaners there, and the old dry cleaning material liquids kind of seep through the pipes and into the ground, and so to be part of the long-term remediation of that groundwater and that soil, they basically need to improve what we'll call the straw that basically pumps water into the ground and then sucks it back up, trying to pull those bad chemicals out of the ground in that area. And then finally, it's like what's happening with the Sunnyvale elections. So we talked about this last week. There will be a series of forums, and I'm going through endorsement interviews right now. But what can you do, to help out in the campaign? First, go to larryformayor.com and sign up. You can help out my campaign. Getting the word out is critical. Forwarding, Facebook posts to your friends actually helps out a lot. Telling people to follow the mayor and all the things that I've been doing for the city. Telling friends and neighbors about what Mayor Klein is doing. Taking yard sign, donating. Definitely, I need some donations as far as all the literature and yard signs that need to be created. Setting up Zoom meetings for people to have these discussions more on a one-on-one, so that I can introduce myself to your friends, to your neighbors, whatever I can do for Sunnyvale. So go to larryformayor.com to find out more on that. So larryformayor.com. And let's go ahead and just wrap up. Thanks for joining me again this week. As always, I continue to be proud of Sunnyvale's response to our pandemic. I know it's been difficult, and new issues seem to be coming up every week. This week it's been fire and smoke, and who knows what next week will bring. But your response can make a difference. Helping your neighbors, sharing masks, mowing neighbors' lawns, sharing food, sharing water, writing positive chalk messages on the sidewalk, all that helps. Continue to build our community, especially during these difficult times, to reach out to people, make that connection. I'm really proud to see Sunnyvale residents pulling together to help their neighbors, to help strangers, to check in on friends and family. If you're out on a walk, wave, say hi to people at a safe social distance. People miss that interaction. Sunnyvale will emerge from this as a stronger community. We're in this together. We'll get through this together. Thanks for listening, and until next week, stay safe, stay cool as much as possible, and wear your mask. Take care. I hope that everyone's safe this week. It's been a very difficult week. Take care. Bye.